We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Okay, welcome back, everybody, to the greatest podcast on the internet. The only one where you really learn things on every episode. That's why we're going to give it 5 stars. Today we have another great guest, but on a subject that you're probably familiar with. We're going to talk about China. We're going to talk about fentanyl. We're going to talk about how the Chinese are involved in the Mexican cartel drug trade that is killing tens of thousands of Americans all the time. And our guest today is one of our generation's greatest investigative journalists, someone who's exposed the Clintons, other corrupt politicians, and I think somehow get some really interesting sources, which I'm really curious about, and really open our eyes into the fentanyl crisis, global corruption, understand how China uses fentanyl to poison Americans and purposefully does so, which, by the way, is another conclusion that was drawn just very recently from the Select Committee on China here in Congress. So we're here with Peter Schweizer. He's an investigative journalist, author, appeared in the New York Times bestseller list 8 times, most recently for the book BloodMoney, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans. Previous books are Red Handed, How American Elites Get Rich Helping China Win. 2, Profiles in Corruption. 3, Secret Empires. And 4, Clinton Cash. I mean, it's why a lot of conversation we had about all of those subjects that I think would be interesting to our listeners. You're a consultant of the Office of Speechwriting for President George W. Bush, and served as member of the ultra-terrorism study group at the U.S. government's Sandia National Laboratory. The list goes on. Okay, you know what you're talking about. So, Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Congressman, for having me. I appreciate it.
Where should we begin? Should we talk about China and your recent book? I think we should. I think we should start there, and then I kind of want to get into a broader discussion about, what you've uncovered, the reality of corruption, and you hear constituents all the time. Politics is corrupt. Well, what's that mean exactly? Is it bags of cash? What is it? Is it gold bars in some cases? Yeah. But a lot of times it's a little more nuanced than that, and so we want to dive into that. But I think first let's stick to what's relevant at the moment, and also your recent book on China. One of the things your book reveals is that there's a common question asked: is the Chinese government complicit in it, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I think they absolutely are, and they're complicit in it because there's a long-lasting strategic partnership between Chinese organized crime networks, sometimes called the triads, and the Chinese government. They basically made peace with each other in the 1980s. Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leaders, met with triad leaders and said, look, here's the deal. As long as you are patriotic, meaning you support the CCP in China, we will protect you. We will allow you to operate in China, but just don't engage in criminal activity in our country. You can do as much as you want in the rest of the world. And the triads took that. So they've had a cooperative relationship. They share intelligence. They share information. There are actually senior triad officials that are in senior advisory capacities in the CCP government. So, when they suggest or say that, well, we're trying to deal with fentanyl, it's a criminal activity, it's really not true. And as I chart out in the book, every link in the chain, not just the precursors, but every link in the supply chain, from the precursors to the actual distribution on the street and the money laundering that takes place by the Mexican drug cartels, China is at the center of all of it. And I would argue that China is the senior partner. The drug cartels are the junior partner.
Yeah, and that's similar to our findings as well. I chair the cartel task force and delved very deep into what our government is doing about this and what the actual supply chain looks like. It's a bit more complicated than people realize. And the solutions are not as obvious as people realize. Unfortunately, everybody wants an easy button, and there's not a lot of easy buttons. Now, we actually hit one of the easy buttons last week. I was pretty happy about that. It's just allowing us to collect on the Chinese precursor makers and cartels using FISA. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but a lot more people disagreed with it than I thought. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know why
Yeah.
we're protecting the Fourth Amendment rights of a company in China deliberately poisoning Americans. And basically what you're saying is they're all connected to the Chinese triad. So that seems crazy to me. But luckily it passed, just so everybody knows. And I hope it passes the Senate and becomes law, because it's a major gap in our intelligence collection against these very nefarious groups. And it's one of the
Yeah.
key findings that I've had in my many, many, many meetings with our own agencies. So you're nodding your head like you sound like, at least you agree with me on that. Uh, I thought it was a
Yeah. No, I
no-brainer.
think, yeah. I mean, look, my feeling is that you can look at any law and you can find ways in which somebody might potentially abuse it. So you write the law as best as you can to preclude
Yeah.
that from happening, but you can't use that as an excuse, because otherwise you couldn't pass any legislation. I mean, look at what's happening right now. They're taking the RICO statute and applying it to Donald Trump in Georgia, which is absurd. But the point is, the response is you don't get rid of the RICO statute because of that. So
Right.
I agree with you. I think
It's a good
FISA,
analogy.
you've got to, yeah. I mean, FISA, you've got to think of ways to get rid of the abuses. But I feel like it's legislation that needed to pass, and hopefully it'll get through the Senate.
Yeah. There was, so people know, I mean, there's 56 reforms that probably, you could argue went too far. The FBI would certainly argue they went way too far. But that's what's in the base text, but it wasn't enough for some people. Yeah, so China runs it, right? But is that that's tough to unpack. I mean, because again, the main question is still like, do they run it? Are they actively did they actively create it, or was it kind of like a target of opportunity for the CCP to be like, oh, this is already happening naturally, So they're ordering their precursor chemicals from these companies. It's I guess the black marketplace is letting it happen. We could stop it, or we could not stop it, and obviously they choose not to stop it. Is that a more accurate way of depicting what's happening? It feels very similar to COVID. I mean, you've written about COVID a lot too. It's like it was almost like a target of opportunity for them. Did they purposefully try to infect the world? I don't think we see evidence of that. But did they purposefully let it happen once it was happening and lie about it? Hell yeah, they did. And so
Yeah,
in the end,
no, I think you're right. Yeah, and I think they also tried to maximize the body count with COVID. Once the virus was out, I talk about this in BloodMoney. I mean, they shared a series of suggestions or policy ideas that they knew at the time were false, that would maximize the body count.
Mm.
I mean, look, when it comes to
fentanyl, you wrote real quick,
Yeah.
the respirators. We're like totally off topic, but I read that you wrote about the respirators, and we all know now the respirators killed people. They didn't help people. I did not know the Chinese. So that the Chinese knew that they were bad, and were still promoting that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's evidence that they knew that they were bad. There's also very clear evidence. I quote from leaked Department of Homeland Security documents that they knew in November of 2019 that they had a virus, and a virus that was transmittable from person to
Right.
person.
That
And
I
they
knew.
didn't alert
Yeah.
the rest. Till the end of January. What did they do during those 3 months? They cornered the market on PPE supplies. They
Mhm.
cut their exports to the West, and they went around buying them up from the rest of the world. So by the time they finally told us, oh, by the way, this is transmittable from person to person, there were no PPE supplies left. That
Right.
was a concerted effort. When it comes to the fentanyl, the precursors come from China. 90% of them come into the port of Manzanillo in Mexico. Who runs the international terminal at the port of Manzanillo in Mexico? Not a Mexican company, not an American company, a Chinese company called Hutchison. Hutchison has a long history of smuggling. Our State Department has identified them for weapon smuggling, drug smuggling. So that's where the precursors come in. The precursors are then sent to a town in northern Mexico, primarily to the Sinaloa cartel, where, according to our DEA, there are 2,000 Chinese nationals living in this town in northern Mexico who essentially put these precursors together to make the fentanyl. And by the way, there are Chinese United Front groups that these 2,000 nationals are members of. These are so-called patriotic associations that are affiliated with the CCP. Now that they have the fentanyl, Congressman, they need pill presses and they need pill molds, because most people dying of fentanyl poisoning don't know they're taking fentanyl. They think they're taking Vicodin or Adderall. where do they get the pill presses and the molds from? They get them from China. And according to the Department of Homeland Security, China is selling them to the drug cartels at cost. At
Mhm.
cost. They're not price gouging the drug cartels.
Mm.
And the final stage is the money laundering. The cartels used to launder all their money in Latin American banks. They now launder their money primarily in Chinese state-owned banks. And again, according to government documents, they oftentimes use Chinese exchange students in the United States on
Yeah.
education visas to do it.
So
So every link in the chain is Chinese directed.
the money laundering scheme is an interesting one. It's been described to us, the cartel task force. I almost don't want to try and describe it now because I won't get it right. But it effectively involves, like you said, like an exchange student paying their tuition, something like that. So they take a payment. That payment goes to a drug dealer. So now they have that money. So the money never crosses borders, any borders, from China to Mexico to the U.S. No money crosses any borders, makes it very difficult for us to deal with and track it. It's all trade-based laundering. And it's very easy. And there's an opportunity, and there's a whole market for it in China, not necessarily using bad actors, but anybody with money, because the Chinese have a law, right? I'm getting this right. I think that you can't take out more than, I think, $50,000 is what it is from
Right.
your bank account and put it overseas. And so and obviously a lot of Chinese want to do that because I think they see the writing on the wall. Investing in China is not where the future is. They want to invest in education in America. They want to buy a house in America. So the only way, so the Chinese government does not want them to do that. That's why they have that law. The way they get around that is through this like drug laundering scheme. And I'm not describing it exactly correct, and it's a little complicated, but it's what we've uncovered. Again, how do we stop it? I don't have perfect solutions for this. You have to know,
Yeah.
you have to have access to their communications and then go after them. I mean, that's often as simple as that, and the resources
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah, no, and that's another area, by the way, the communications. If you look at the communication networks the drug cartels use when they're selling fentanyl in the United States, they use Chinese apps and they use Chinese encrypted communication devices. Why? Because they know that the Chinese will not share those with U.S. law enforcement. It gives them a completely secure base for communication. So, it's hard for me to look at all of this and conclude that the CCP doesn't really know about this. It's kind of random. It's to me, it is a replay. It is a reversal of the opium wars, which still is a
Interesting.
major a subject that people are taught in China. President Xi is obsessed with it. In fact, President Xi's father, who President Xi, of course, reveres, he built a big mausoleum in his honor. His father was a revolutionary with Mao. One of his father's most famous acts was as a 14-year-old boy. He tried to poison his teacher for failing to be sufficiently revolutionary. And President Xi thinks that's kind of a cool thing. So it indicates to me where he is as far as, the use of certain techniques, what is acceptable and what is not.
Yeah. And they explain their this chip on their shoulder real quick about the opium wars. Most Americans have no idea what that's all about, and yet it's front and center in the Chinese mind, apparently, of how we've wronged them. They've been
Yeah.
mad at us for a long time. It's like having a spouse that they've been mad at you this whole time and you didn't even know it. That's sort of like the last 50 years with China.
Yeah, it's so, in the early 1800s, China was actually doing quite well as a country and as an economy. And then primarily Britain started the opium trade. And a lot of Chinese became addicted. At the high point, it's estimated that 25% of all Chinese nationals in China were taking opium regularly. And what happened? It went from being a pretty major, a vibrant economy on the global stage to the end of the 1800s to being this backwater, divided, broken country. And this is what they regarded as the century of humiliation. So they see the drug trade and the fact that the UK engaged in it. When the Chinese authorities tried to block it, Britain threatened and sometimes used military force to keep that market open. So for China, in their history, this is kind of the pivotal event that took China from being a relatively prosperous power to becoming a third world country within a century. They blame it on the drug trade, and they believe that I think that fentanyl is an opportunity to sort of repay us for it, us being the West. And you see elements of this, by the way, Congressman. There's a Chinese individual named Juan who in 2021 was sanctioned by the Biden administration as part of the Treasury Department initiative to put economic sanctions on those involved in the fentanyl trade. He's a drug dealer, criminal guy who also goes by the name Broken Tooth. He was a senior advisor to the consultative body to the CCP. We slapped sanctions on him for his involvement in the fentanyl trade. 3 months after that, he was given an award by the CCP, and they gave a rousing speech where he said he was proud of what he was doing with fentanyl because it was getting back at the West for what had happened in the opium trade. So they're open about it in terms of how they talk to each other. They certainly don't say that directly to us.
Yeah, and that's helpful. And again, you're coming to the same conclusion that very recently was announced by Mike Gallagher and the Select Committee on China. And I think it answers that question. That's why they're an adversary. Now, I don't think I have to convince that many Americans of that at this point. There's other reasons they're an adversary. It's why we push for the TikTok bill that a bunch of TikTokers are so mad about. It looks like we might pass an additional version of that here shortly. With the one change of giving the president a little bit more time to allow it to happen. But look, I tell people, if American investors, and I don't know why you wouldn't buy TikTok. It honestly seems like an amazing investment. I'll get on TikTok. I'll get on. Just but it's got to be American. You can't. In this weird free speech argument, like our amendment, our Bill of Rights does not apply to China, and it kind of gets at the heart of why people voted against my amendment to target Chinese triads and cartels. Is citing some liberty and privacy reason. Like that's some shallow reasoning if you're not applying it correctly. And I find it and I'm gonna bridge now to some of your work on corruption. This is how I'm gonna make the bridge. And I have a list of members of Congress who voted against the TikTok bill and against my amendment. And so I'm not making, this is not spin on my part. You voted to protect the Chinese ability to collect American data. And you also voted to protect Chinese triads from our American surveillance. Like, that's not spin. That's exactly what you voted on. And there's a list of members and they're both on the far left and far right. What the hell do we do with that? I mean, and in your research too, you find financial ties to China. Now, the people you list, actually, some of the people you list are on that list that I just said. So talk to me about that. And let's talk about corruption. We don't have much time left. Let's finish the conversation out there. I want to know what you mean by that. And I think it'll be an interesting discussion given my position. But let's talk about the Chinese connections real quick and the Biden family and the people you list and what does that mean, Chinese connections?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge problem. I mean, China has a strategy. They call it elite capture. And it's pretty genius because what they're basically saying is, look, rather than, going toe to toe with the United States, why don't we just buy off certain parts of their leadership? And we're not going to buy them off by, giving them shoe boxes of cash, right? I mean, that's kind of low hanging fruit. Only the idiots do that. They do it by, striking
Bob
deals.
Menendez. Bars of gold.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, that if you're doing that, it's really you're either arrogant or stupid or both. Most members of Congress may have certain elements of that, but they're smarter about it. So, the way the Chinese do it is they go to a congressman or they go to a senator or somebody in the executive branch and they say, look, we'd love to strike a commercial deal with your adult son or your adult daughter. Or you've got a company. We want to help you access the Chinese market. And so by doing so, they're not engaging in a direct bribe, but they're using the prospect of making money to capture you because you are now essentially becoming dependent upon them for financial success. Who doesn't want financial success?
You become sympathetic. You become sympathetic to the state of their economy at least. And then there's nothing illegal about any of this of what you just said. So that's the other, I guess, clever point to make there. So, but where's
Yeah.
where's like the biggest example of this that we should, that you've discovered? And
Well, I would give one from both sides. I would begin with the Biden family. I mean, in the case of the Biden family, they've gotten tens of millions of dollars from Chinese businessmen who are linked to the Chinese intelligence service. I've written about that extensively.
Mhm.
And there's no discernible business there.
Yeah,
For those tens of millions of dollars, Hunter Biden, Jim Biden never gave them any. There was no
no
consultative
service,
advice,
nothing.
no service, nothing, no products.
And what's frustrating is because American people know this. This has been uncovered not just by you, but our oversight committee recently.
Yep.
But there's no laws broken, and
Yeah.
it's not clear that you could make, there's not clear that you even would write a law to make this illegal.
Yeah.
But it's suspicious as hell, and
Yeah.
it should be. It should at the very least be a very big political weight for him in the reelection, right? But it's
Yeah. No,
frustrating for us because it's like, are you going to impeach him for it? I'm like, it's not. It doesn't reach that level. Like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is a problem because they exploit these gaps in the law. I do think there are things related to Hunter Biden. FARA, for example, would be a prime example of where you could charge him criminally. But this is the inherent problem with how it works. And I really believe that if you look back at the Cold War, for example, the notion that the Reagan or the Carter family would be doing deals with Russian businessmen at the Cold War is
Right.
absurd. And I think we're at the same point in the relationship with China. So I do think I'm not a lawmaker. I don't know what it looks like. I do think we need to look at this issue of elected officials having commercial ties with China and thinking of a way that it can be handled in a way that reduces this vulnerability. I don't know what that bill looks like, but so Biden would be one example. I would switch to the other side of the aisle and look at Mitch McConnell. And again, nothing illegal here. And in the case of Mitch McConnell they actually have an underlying business. Elaine Chao, his wife, they have a Foremost Shipping Group. Back in 1993, it's been documented in the Chinese press back in the 90s. Mitch McConnell, his wife, and his father-in-law went to China, met as guests of the Chinese State Shipbuilding Corporation, the largest military contractor in China. And the China State Shipbuilding Corporation said, tell you what, we'll build big tankers for you. We'll get state banks to finance the construction of those ships. We'll provide crews to man those ships, and we will get state contracts for you to ship these goods across the Pacific, and we'll make you very wealthy. And the business exploded. The problem is, if you look at the bona fide shipping journals, people that are in the industry, Mitch McConnell's in a position that if he were to take steps that really, really pissed off Beijing, they could destroy that family shipping business overnight.
Mm,
Nothing illegal about this, but it's leverage, and this is what they want.
yeah,
They want leverage over individual legislators, and this
yeah.
is elite capture, and this is a problem we've got to figure out to deal with, I think, in some responsible way.
Yeah. To be objective and fair, though, those are two very different examples, right? I mean,
100%.
like one is a very
100%.
legitimate business that applies to thousands and thousands of American businesses. One
Yes,
is like you're getting money for nothing. I mean, the Biden
correct,
stuff is just really, really,
correct.
it's way worse. Can we agree on that?
No,
Uh, yeah. Okay.
100%. 100%. But I would also add, I mean, the challenge is you look at, Wall Street and Silicon Valley when Trump imposed tariffs on China, whether one agrees with that policy or not, what did China do? Did they go lobby the White House? No, they went to Wall Street and they went to Silicon Valley and said, you
Mm,
guys are going to go talk to the administration because, again, they have leverage over
yeah.
legit, great American companies to say, if you don't do this, we're going to damage you. It's a problem when they are able to manipulate businesses, whether owned by politicians or not.
Of course. I mean, when you got John Cena is speaking Chinese about how sorry he is for some bullshit. I can't remember. I mean, what a fucking loser. But I just posted the story recently. It came out. Politico reported that the Chinese, I assume, embassy diplomats had been lobbying staff members of Congress about the TikTok bill. There was no names given. There wasn't a lot more information. I don't know if you have more information on that. They certainly didn't talk to my staff. But I think all it proves to me is it's a counter argument to the Chinese argument that this is a business relationship only. There's nothing to see here. Why would the CCP care? Why do you
Yeah.
care? If you're not collecting the data, then why do you care?
Yeah.
Of course you're
Yeah.
collecting the data, and of course you want to eventually do cognitive warfare, which I think is how you phrased it.
Yeah. It's the Chinese phrase. And look, here's what I tell people is, yeah, ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, is a Chinese company, but it's not even just a Chinese company. It's a Chinese company with a particularly unique set of ties to the Chinese state. Number one,
Mhm.
this algorithm that drives TikTok is not only a company secret. The Chinese government in 2019 designated the company's algorithm as a state secret in China. That's how much they value this.
You're
The
talking about the law passed in 2017, the Chinese
I'm actually
Surveillance
talking
National
about
Security Act.
no,
You're
I'm
talking about
actually
something different.
yeah, no. This is actually in 2019, the Chinese
Okay.
government, you can find it in the Chinese media, designated the ByteDance algorithm for TikTok as a state secret. This was a protective move as questions were being raised about TikTok. So they said, no, the
Wow.
algorithm is not going to go to the United States.
I wish I'd
because-
had that fact in the recent debates on this. I mean, we won, so it doesn't matter, but like that would have been a
Yeah.
great one for that
Yeah.
hearing and for that
Yeah.
just a general debate.
Well, here's the
Se-
second thing. The
Send me
second
that.
Yeah, the second thing to keep in mind is that ByteDance does joint research all the time with the Chinese Ministry of State Security and with the Ministry of Propaganda. And what are they studying? One of the things they study, I quote from them in the book, is how to manipulate people online emotionally. This is one of the things that
Yes.
ByteDance is actually researching with the Chinese Ministry of State Security. So this is not a normal Chinese tech company. It is a company that is joined at the hip with the Chinese intelligence complex. And that's what makes it, I think, even more frightening than just a normal Chinese company that would raise concerns.
Yeah, that's always been my argument when people are like, I don't care about my data. Because look, I can't convince a 16-year-old that likes TikTok that that they should care about their data. I get their perspective. I don't know why they would care about their data.
Yeah.
But I always use your argument, what you just said. Like, you have to understand that this is a propaganda machine and the best one ever. Like, I wish I had it for I wish I could use it against China and Iran. And I wish we had this kind of tool. They love this tool. And we've got to take it away. Not clear to me why it's still stopped in the Senate, but I think that's one of the reasons we're going to add it to this bill coming up here in the supplemental. And I mean, just going back to like, what again, going back to corruption, because I think it's an interesting topic. You've written a lot of books about it. We've gone over different versions of it. There's the taking gold bars part, and somehow that guy's still a senator.
Right.
Not clear to me like where that investigation is or what's going on there. I haven't followed it very closely. Then there's this sort of like kind of influence peddling, sort of sucking you into a situation where you're harming yourself personally if you make certain decisions, and you're never going to make that illegal. And I'm not sure you should call it corruption. It's I don't know what you would call it. But and then there's and this is definitely something I want to talk to you about because you've mentioned me in this is insider trading. Are we insider trading up in Congress? And so I get dragged through the mud on this for my whole $10,000 of investments. And people cite my net worth is $4.5 million. And I'm like, well, wouldn't that be fucking nice if that were my net worth? But it's bullshit. And so like, there's two sides of this story. That's kind of why I think these kind of conversations are interesting, because I see it in real time. I see what lobbyists come to me for. I see what all the rich people ask congressmen for. And I got to say, it's just not what you think. It could have been at a certain point in time. There have been a lot of rule changes that, and I don't know how the old system operated, but I mean, the 80s were crazy, right? I mean, everybody's smoking cigarettes. It was a wild time, but it is different now. And so when a guy like me who doesn't have much money is told I can't save my money and invest it for my family, I kind of want to tell you to fuck off. That's what because I'm not insider trading.
Right.
I have, and most smart people, and especially if you've been dealing with the Hill, that the real problem here is we have way less information than we should. We don't have more information.
Right.
Right. And so it makes me a little defensive, especially when it's also when it's a lie about me personally. And people choose me even when I'm like number 25 or whatever on the list, just because I'm clickbait. And I think that's what you did too, right? You listed some names, but you didn't choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You chose like me and some other famous people because my name is well known. And so it becomes a little exhausting on that side. But like, should we be banned from trading? Should we be banned from investing? I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think it's a great question. And yeah, look, there's a lot of, misinformation, I think, that floats around. It's become a very sexy topic. My views on this are, pretty clear cut. We want members of Congress vested in our free market system. My concern has always been the trading of options, where you're putting, you're shorting the market. In the book that I first broke this on, called "Throw Them All Out" in 2011. You had the ranking Republican on the House Finance Committee, after going through a confidential briefing with the Treasury Secretary during the financial crisis in 2008, did a massive short on the market, knowing, because the Treasury Secretary told him the night before, the market's going to drop significantly. So I don't like options trading. I would like to have members of Congress vested in index funds, broad mutual funds, not trading options. And I think it's a particular problem when you have not an average rank and file member of Congress, but when you have somebody in leadership, the chairman of certain committees, who, for example, are going to be privy to know, is Medicare or Medicaid going to cover a new prescription drug? They should not be trading stock in companies that are going to be affected by those kinds of decisions. So I do think that there is some of the criticism that is unfair, that's kind of made up, that is gone on too extensively. But on the other hand, it is a problem because I feel like it incentivizes the concentration of power. The more power that you have, the more access to information you have, and you're going to have actors that are going to misuse that information for personal benefit. So I think the solution is not to stop anybody from trading, but you should be in broad index funds, or you should be in mutual funds. We should certainly not have, frankly, Paul Pelosi doing massive options trading on Amazon when Amazon is up for certain government contracts. It's just a terrible thing in my mind.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can see all that and sort of and probably agree with it. Especially just coming from somebody who just doesn't really care that much, because I actually don't. Despite the nonsense in the media, it's like I just don't. It's not a big part of my portfolio,
Right.
even though the lies were told that it was. There is probably some middle ground, but like what I always caution people, because it's a common statement to make, like, wow, when they look at their net worth as a member of Congress and they only make $174,000 a year, and I'm like, most of these people you're pointing at were very rich before they got to Congress, and rich people know how to get richer. That is what it is. It's not part of your job. If anything, it is absolutely the opposite. As somebody who just came out of the military and I don't come from wealth, I'd be much better off quitting right now and moving on, just from a financial standpoint. And it's like that truth that other side of the story has to get out too. And and people are like, well, it's another common slogan. You're bought and paid for. By who? And what the fuck does that mean? By a lobbyist. Like, there's pretty small caps, by the way, on what any kind of PAC can give anybody.
Right.
It just doesn't happen, I think, the way people believe it does. And then in the cases that it really is happening, people take that and apply it probably too broadly in the aggregate, and I think create this what is a very distrustful view of an important organization. And sometimes it's good to have a thoughtful conversation about what's true and what isn't.
Oh, no, I think that's exactly right. I think it's very fair. My concern has always been the personal enrichment, particularly as it relates to family members. So, for example, lobbying. I believe we have a constitutional right to petition our government, and that applies for the Chamber of Commerce, labor unions, whoever. But I don't like the fact there was a study a couple of years ago that said 1/3 of the entire U.S. Senate had an immediate family member, that's a spouse or an adult child, who was a registered lobbyist. You had a Republican senator from Missouri who's no longer in office, who had 3 adult children and his spouse that were all registered lobbyists. My point is, lobbyists have a job to do, but are you going to tell me that those individuals, these 1/3 of the U.S. Senate that have a family member, that those lobbyists are being hired totally based on their skill set, and it has nothing to do with who they're related to, I'm just not buying it. So, for example, one of my proposed reforms is let's just have a law that says that, a member of Congress, a U.S. senator, should not have an immediate family member who's a registered lobbyist. That to me seems to be a fair reform, because otherwise people are going to have the concern that this is a kind of a transactional relationship. I want something from this powerful congressman or senator, so I'm going to hire their kid as a lobbyist. How is that really any different, I would say, than putting money in their pocket indirectly? It's the same end result in my mind.
Yeah, it could be. I don't think I didn't know that statistic. It's alarming that many family members even want to be lobbyists. It's a lot of former members leave, and then they go into lobbying. And the reason they get hired by lobbying firms is simply because they know the map of the work. They know that they understand the lay of the land. And you could interpret the fact that there's a lot of family members who are lobbyists in two ways. You can interpret it that as they know the lay of the land and they have access to the entire point of being a lobbyist. That's why it's a lot of former staffers and a lot of former members, because they have relationships. They've already got the Rolodex of contact info, so they can just talk. There's nothing corrupt about that. It's just they already know people, and so that's the whole point of lobbying. Now, influence is a different question, and I don't know. It could be exactly what you're saying. It probably depends on the member. It depends on them. It's probably a case by case analysis. Influence with lobbyists is interesting. I never have a meeting with a lobbyist who disagrees with me,
Right.
because they just write me off, right? Like, and it's that's kind of how it works. And now, to be frank, I wish it did work that way. I tell so we meet with like oil and gas folks all the time, right? And I'm very pro oil and gas because I'm from Houston. That's like what I'm supposed to be. And I tell them, like, you really shouldn't waste so much time talking to me. You should, you should be going to offices that disagree with you. And that's, I try to pull back the curtain a little bit for people who, because when people don't understand how something works up here, I think they get a little fearful, and they'll create narratives that some of which are true and some of which aren't. We're running up on our last few minutes here because I have to leave. Any parting words about any of these subjects? Something I read about, going back to China and Biden's potential connections with China. Tell me about the white wolf. Let's end on that. That's a kind of a curious issue.
Yeah, weird association here. We know in 2017 that a Chinese businessman named Yamin gave the Biden family, according to the emails on record, gave the Biden family a $5 million interest-free forgivable loan, which the Bidens have never repaid back. Who doesn't want that kind of a loan? What's interesting about Yamin, this businessman, is that he's business partners with a Chinese gang leader named White Wolf. And that's the gang leader and his gang who set up the Sinaloa cartel and the fentanyl trade and made the Sinaloa cartel the kings of fentanyl. So the question becomes, and it's been a mystery to me, we ultimately can't look into the man's soul, but why is it that Joe Biden will not directly confront China on the fentanyl issue? Trump certainly raised it. Members of Congress have raised it. But Joe Biden, in all of his discussions with President Xi, he says, I bring it up, but there's no finger pointing here. It's time for finger pointing. And the question is why? And I believe my hypothesis is that part of it is the embarrassment of this association, that when you start talking about China's involvement in the fentanyl trade, you are now going to start having conversations about White Wolf and Yamin, and the fact that you literally have 1 degree of separation from the fentanyl trade and the Biden family finances, which I think is, as they would say in DC, a political liability.
Right. And it's things like that we have to pay attention to. And I think that the point you're making, as I'm reading what you wrote here, is he was in 2021, he was specifically and inexplicably left off an executive order listing persons and companies sanctioned when he certainly met all the criteria to be sanctioned. A convicted international drug trafficker, former Chinese triad gang leader, served 10 years in U.S. prison. Keeps going. And it was an associate of his who had this interest-free loan or
His
forgivable
business
loan.
partner.
His
His
business
business
partner.
partner.
Right.
Yeah, he was business partners. They were jointly invested in various things. They're both associated with similar front organizations operating in the West. So, it is a question, and I think that's where really, we could leave it here, where I think the failure is. I think, there's a lot of good work I see being done in Congress now recently on China that I think is very good, but this administration has been incredibly soft on China with regards to many things that are going on. And I think it's out of this misguided notion of quote unquote engagement with China. When you're dealing with this kind of behavior, you don't need engagement. You need direct conversation to confront the issue and deal with it, to have an honest discussion about it.
You need strength. I mean, it's the only way to talk to Putin, to Xi Jinping, to the Ayatollah. They respond to strength. They respond to very direct strength, and you have to mean what you say. And if you don't do that, the world potentially falls into chaos. And I don't like chaos. That's the pre-World War II world, and you wouldn't like that world either. I like the American-led world. So but peace through strength requires the strength part, and the strength part's very uncomfortable for people. I think the right-wing populists forget that. They like to talk tough. They don't want to be tough. And of course, the left wing has never known it. And I don't like that those two bedfellows have become allies. And we'll leave it there.
Great
Peter,
conversation.
Peter, thanks for being on. This is fun.
Thanks for having me.